parts of the world where this can be in transportation. Even it's a hydrogen market is already 100 billion US dollar a year market. People who think they need the money in 16 months from now probably should start talking to bankers today. There is no plug and play market yet for hydrogen and its derivatives. To look to solar and power, think what did they have that we don't? And I think the key message there is there was a very clear plug-in market. What do we need to fix so we can mirror the success of solar and wind industry many years ago?
Ladies and gentlemen, today we're thrilled to welcome Eric Raku. He's a hydrogen book author with over 11,000 downloads across 130 countries. Yes, more popular than most self help books out there. Eric also hosts the podcast Global Tales of Carbon Transition and leads Raku Associates. And if that's not enough, he's a hydrogen expert helping businesses and governments tackle the energy transition worldwide, from Europe's boardrooms to places where even ordering a coffee is an adventure. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Arnas. It's a pleasure to engage in this dialogue.
Your book has reached readers in 130 countries. What's the most surprising feedback you've received about hydrogen development in unexpected markets?
What I found most surprising contrast, let's say it this way, in global media, we read that energy majors have given up on uh, on hydrogen, or at least investing much less. Um, what I'm getting behind the scenes, that there is quite a bit of employees who basically download the Touching Hydrogen Future and take ideas out of it, how the world could develop. I was also asked by a strategy department of one energy major to email a box of books, because, and asked why is that useful. Said, well, we use that book to just see where the futures may develop, because that book basically provides and plausible scenarios of how 2030s 2040s can develop. I co-wrote it together with Rosa Puentes as co-editor and 37 others editors. I was the initiator, main editor, but there was basically quite a diverse effort of scholars, businessmen, businesswomen, and younger academics to look at what the future may look like if we keep proceeding on the path of policy support, which we see, and if we keep proceeding, making it economic and developing. And I think that was basically the most surprising for me, that even though in some of the media we see, okay, energy majors are slowing down, at least their staff and their strategy departments definitely keep looking with a big eye to the hydrogen sector.
So, yeah, that tempted me to ask already. And what do they think? What actually is that future for those who didn't read the book?
I think kind of what book helps to imagine what is now also in business language translated as demand side. That's frankly, it's always surprising that we kind of after several years just now get to it. Most important thing for any hydrogen or hydrogen derivative project is to convince users to take up hydrogen or hydrogen derivative. And what this future may look like, that's where the book helps. Is you can see that there are parts of the world where this can be in transportation, even though people focus very much on the electric these days, but part of electric can coexist with fuel cell in transportation, also aviation, maritime. So transportation mobility, that's where it helps to imagine the future and the future outlook. The other part is industrial development. So, there are some lively scenes, for example, in chapter on India, on how their steel factories of the future do make use of hydrogen. There is the part where we see the fertilizer and refining industry, which is already a no-brainer because it's existing use of fossil-based hydrogen is making the transition. And then sometimes you see some, let's say, minor use cases. I mean, there are some funny examples in the book, like people looking to make let's say, direct air capture and perhaps use some of the hydrogen produced energy in data centers. So examples like that, I guess, a bit more off radar now. But industry mobility, that's where we see the pathway. It is pushed by policy as we see it in practice. So that's where the future is going in then over the next 5 to 10 years.
We will definitely touch on these in upcoming questions, but one thing I've overlooked is your experience. Could you expand a little bit on that one before we go to the next one?
Oh, sure. Uh, and perhaps, so I'm, as you mentioned in the introduction, I'm a consultant, podcaster, and a writer. Um, and to become, let's say, multi-vessel in terms of connecting the dots, my career goes across various bits of the value chain in the energy sector. So I started out in energy distribution as a young recruit management trainee. Then I in power and gas. Then I went on to sell natural gas in large quantities for a company that no longer exists. It's Eon Ruhr Gas. The successors of it are known as Eon and Uniper. And then after selling natural gas, I moved to government. So for a number of years, I worked for a government regulating power and gas sector. And then I moved to European energy regulator, where I helped co-design detailed rules for power and gas. I also been on the board of a European energy regulator, the Board of Appeal, and there also met very interesting people with experience in European Commission, national regulator boards. So it really helped me understand how we take decisions in interpretation of regulation, which is very helpful because it's an important driver of energy sector. And then afterwards, I moved to consulting. I worked in London for a strategy firm called Beringer. We're excellent in power and gas markets, particularly on the investment side. And then moved afterwards to the global hydrogen team of BCG, where I enjoyed over 2.5 years of global experience, really kind of looking across the continents. Doing, whilst there, I did over 100 cases, projects globally on all the continents included, having kind of seeing in short notice what are the investors and clients looking when moving through energy transition to hydrogen questions. So that was quite interesting. That's also the reason I wanted to be part of BCG, is to see the world as well, because before my experience was mostly a bit European. So now very very keen to move to next chapter, where on one side I think we need to imagine the future to deliver it. So that's why the writer podcaster bit, one needs to be curious, also look beyond your silo. So if you want to understand energy transition, you must understand what happens with power grids, what happens with oil and gas, but equally with green energy, and connect the dots. So that's why I'm also doing writing, podcasting, to be multiversal in that sense. and connect the dots. And on the other hand, I think there is really a world there where we can practically help companies to move ahead in this space, basically build new energy businesses. And
Yeah.
hydrogen is one part of it. I think it's not the only part of it, because before it was a bit hype.
A bit more, but yeah, we'll come to that. Uh, Through your podcast lens, what stories about carbon transition aren't getting enough attention?
I think it's particularly geographical. We're very used to notice a lot what happens in our local neighborhoods, in our country. We're perhaps still okay observing what happens on our continent. We are already much more blind to what happens one continent further
Hmm.
or in other time zones. So at least through podcasting, I think the story uh, that should be told, you always have to also wonder if somebody's telling you a story, for example, about Europe, does it apply in China, or does it apply in US or in Australia, or in Africa? And I think there is that's one lens which I think is we should be paying attention to whenever we hear a story. Wonder for ourselves, how does it play out in another geography and time zone? And I think the other bit is that their solutions are much more interconnected than we think. I think global corporations are starting to be able to take that lens. They're forced to, particularly global industrials, right? You can no longer just say, okay, I'm going to do it everything hydrogen. You actually probably also need to look at electrification and at carbon capture and storage solutions. Just as an example, at the very least, an example. Also biofuels. So there is multiple solutions you need to understand when you're now building a modern industrial energy based business.
It's a huge puzzle. Having founded Raku Associates, what consulting challenges around hydrogen most frequently catch clients off guard?
Off guard. Well, with a good consultant, I would hope there is nothing off guard. But I guess consultants get called when you're first thinking, should I enter that market? You first just try to understand who are the players, what is the landscape, what geography should I play in, and how should I do it? Can I go alone? Do I need certain partnerships? Um, so in that sense, what off guard, I'm not sure, but maybe another word was be, what are the key points to pay attention to when you're not yet familiar with hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives business, and you're moving into that market. Maybe it's just good to understand it's already an existing business, right? There is
Yeah.
fossil hydrogen being made, and there are three global companies that are very good at it. And in this industrial gas business, it's Linde, it's Air Products in Air Liquide, and they already have multi-billion turnover. Roughly depends, which agency you ask. It's a hydrogen market is already $100 billion US a year market. So that market is very active and exists. So we don't need to change anything around this. So I think if you just already think about from that perspective, you're not getting caught off guard. And when you move into the market, I think and that's a bit surprising actually. I'm still asking myself, what can we do to help about it? It seems the industry caught themselves off guard that in order to get multi-billion financing, you need offtake agreements. That
Yeah.
bankers, like a surprise, told them, if you want to get, hundreds of billions of financing, you will need to show a 10, 15-year agreement with an A-rated company that will pay you for for services for hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives delivered. It seems that
Yeah.
industry caught off guard, which does surprise me, actually. I'm thinking what we, also as various leading consultants, maybe we also dropped the ball somewhere. We should have kind of focused or helped industries focus on this earlier.
Yeah, very interesting. You mentioned hydrogen's rebirth. How does this cycle differ from previous hydrogen hype cycles?
Ah, like, really cool. It's a bit almost philosophical, but I think what is, if you look like to, let's say, year 2000 or so, so when I was also roughly entering the job market myself, at the time, um, yeah, there were promises that, like in the State of the Union, and I think it was George Bush around that time, we said the child that will be born today, so in 2000, will drive a hydrogen car. So he was not wrong because, fast forward 2024, 24 years later, uh, there are children who drive, and can drive a hydrogen car. They're not There are not too many, and probably those children are more likely to be, for example, in Japan or uh, where this is, or Korea, or even China. But so it's not necessarily a child with an American passport. But in that sense, George Bush in 2000 was not wrong in the State of the Union. So I think, why that anecdote? I think where there was a lot of betting on is mass personal car transportation to be the key sector that will take off the hydrogen, and then the respective developments in fuel cells and the infrastructure would take that industry off. And it was actually not too much discussion about greening up the fertilizer refining industry, or, in fact, there was no yet a Paris Agreement, right? So if we look at what changed over 20 years ago, I mean, first of all, technology advanced a lot, so we made a lot of interesting progress around, in terms of understanding where hydrogen is, let's say, in terms of engines, more or less efficient, what can be perhaps better, sort of now investing, like some firms do, in engines that work on hydrogen derivatives like methanol, ammonia. Um, so that's one big difference. I think we made some progress also in efficiency, and there is still more to be done in this area. So new technologies of electrolyzers, where we make green hydrogen, so hydrogen produced from water with electrolysis. There is steps to be made still as we scale the industry. So on one side, technology progressed. On the other side, what is also different is the choice of sector. As I said, I think before, the bet was really on personal transportation. Now we realized it's probably in industrial scale transportation, in aviation, maritime, through derivatives, but also um, in heavy industry truck, let's say heavy trucks, long distance, 1,000 kilometer type of rides, where it also really matters that you don't want to lose an hour or two for recharging, um, and where the cost of hydrogen is low enough, like we're starting to see emerge in geographies like China or Middle East. That's where transportation, at least for longer distances, can still come back. But the real focus is in hard to abate aviation, maritime, and industry.
It's very interesting because I had a few conversations on these topics, and they're not so like the, the outlook is not so positive, at least right for upcoming period. And in general, there's there's this notion that the main focus should be on the industries that are already using hydrogen, say gray hydrogen, to go to green
Mhm.
hydrogen.
Yeah.
The inter- yeah,
No, please continue. So it sounds like you're building your question.
actually, I do. The International Energy Agency predicts that 540 million tons of hydrogen will be needed annually by 2050. How realistic is this target given current production and investment trends?
I mean, let me first start giving a compliment to IEA. I think IEA has emerged over years as most renowned and reputable independent agency that gives help to policymakers in thinking around how the future may unfold. I think many years ago, it probably would have been rather shell scenarios that policymakers used, or perhaps BP World Outlook. Now, IEA World Energy Outlook is probably the most looked to vision of the future that policymakers use as reference. And I mean, that's amazing, and big compliments to people who work there. I know
Yeah.
some, and I think they're all very, very great individuals. So, and there is very large teams also often in consultation with industries involved who come about to eventually coming down to a projection, right? And often it's what you quote, 540, it's one of the scenarios. They're more bullish, less bullish. They're also often compared to what the industry says. I mean, having said that, right? So, how realistic it is, I would rather say, what do we need to believe to for that kind of uh, quintupling? So, because roughly now it's 100 megaton a year gray hydrogen. So this means this market would green up, plus we would go times five over the next 30 years, roughly. And so we have, in fact, already 26 years left. So what does it mean? What do we need to believe? I think, first of all, we need to believe for that scenario that policy support remains unwavered. So that means that in geographies like United States, we do see the rollout of Inflation Reduction Act with its support to strong support to hydrogen as it stands now. I think we need to see that in Europe, and we do see that there is a unwavering support as part of the next 5 years to their hydrogen markets. And we do see that for industrialization. It's part of the task letters that were given to the new commissioners. Um, and if we're also building out hydrogen infrastructure, which is a very important part of that. And then if we look to other countries like Japan, Korea, there is also unwavering support. And those are leading markets that keep progressing. So policy alignment is one important must believe. Second one, we must in the private sector find business models that are able to monetize the policy support in a convincing way that the financing sector will provide private finance to build the required volumes. I think in this part, we're still learning. So that's my point earlier around that we seems to be caught off guard. At least that's if you read the lines. That's we actually need a 10 to 15-year offtake agreements or a similar type of security for financing world to say yes, here is the available finance, and that's no problem. There is a lot of sustainable finance, as we know. I mean, just in climate bonds, in COP29, one of the panelists in my conference where I was presenting as well mentioned over 5 trillion climate bonds. They're looking for the right sustainable investments. So we have the finance, but we need this offtake arrangements, new business models that work. And that's a second thing we need to believe. So if we have the policy alignment, if we have their business models and contractual arrangements, and that part clearly needs attention, and we need to share best practices in this. And I think that's also where the sector needs to step up. So at least I personally, and maybe this is a good moment to announce it, with with a good friend of mine who is a renowned lawyer, Anna Stanic, we plan to provide a free template for offtake agreement that people can just use. I mean, because apparently people don't know, what does a hydrogen offtake agreement looks like many years. So at least providing this kind of, let's say, free license type of gift, uh, maybe a small thing everybody from his or her know-how can do. So we accelerate people finding the contracts and then afterwards finding the finance. So if policy alignment continues, if we have the right commercial and business model and contractual arrangement around it, and the financing does then come in as it's being promised and signaled, that if the offtakes are there, the financing world will come through, then the figure that IEA mentions, I think, will materialize. Are we currently on that pathway? Not yet.
Yeah, yeah, true. So first thing, to support your initiative with Anna, I will offer you a free webinar for all of our readers and all of our audience, so you can present it. So count on that to support the community. And the second is that you actually entered pretty much the next question with the previous answer, and that's, the hydrogen market will require around 10 trillion by 2050. How can global financial institutions be mobilized to meet this investment needed? And you already gave part of this answer.
Well, they ought to mobilize themselves. I think it's a bit. To be fair, in my job in BCG, I had tried together with my colleagues who are really, really passionate people, to have an open conversation with global financing industry. We all, at the time of BCG, also published a very nice research about it. So we did, what does it take to unlock global financing, both for carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. And frankly, so what we did is also, as part of it, speaking to over 15 global institutions with very, very material capital across all continents, yeah, including Europe, Asia, Australia, US. What I personally, as I reflect back, um, there was a bit of, at the time, um, it's now over a year ago, there was a bit of like wait and see for, let's say, others to lead financing. So it's a bit like, oh, I'm happy to be part of, consortium attitude. I think what one needs, and I think my impression is that the financing world is now moving toward that credit committees of banks that already know that it's not going to be perfect, the first deals, and that they're willing to take some more risks than just financing, let's say, a wind farm, which is more established business, or a solar park, right, which is now
Yeah.
established business. So taking a bit more risk on the front foot for the first projects, perhaps, capped to a certain amount. And as far as I'm aware, there are banks who already started looking in this way in the geographies they know well, with customers they know well. So I think it's coming, but there is still this, let's say, I would love attitude. I would love it to be a copy paste of what I've been doing for renewables. I must honestly say this is also a good discussion I'd like to take to a global conference I'm attending on 11 December. I'm moderating a panel in Berlin with representatives, include, for example, Santander. We have investment bankers from Sterling Partners. Um, so, and we also have energy infrastructure partners from Switzerland who own uh, a portfolio of companies that are active in molecules world, but are moving to the clean world. So I think this question is still, let's say, also to be further discussed with industry. So my view is, go to when you are in banking industry, go to credit committees and get more Monday mandate for taking more risk. So how can more risk be? So, for example, be willing to discuss projects where the offtake agreement is not 10 or 15 years, but 5 years for a
Yeah.
certain volume. So very tangible. Say, we will take also a look at deals where you have 5 years. If it's, for example, in a market where there is plans to build hydrogen infrastructure like backbone in Europe, which means you will have other parties eventually where you can sell into after 5 years, right?
Mhm.
So this type of kind of linking it to infrastructure, for example, and looking at it a bit more broader, that could already be innovation for
Yeah.
getting the financing.
We're still we'll still stay on the banks. What specific financial models could be introduced to lower perceived risks for banks?
Well, I guess project finance is the model that everybody expects to start flying, because initial projects are often done with grants, with balance sheet financing, so perhaps bonds to a strong corporate mother, which then lends on uh, to a business unit that does the green or their other low carbon hydrogen investments. I think if we move to project finance, um, that will mean that um, parties will need to also almost, I would say, consider financiers as their future partners. So that also means that you don't wait to call your bankers when you kind of actually want to start ordering the capital expenditures and putting steel in the ground. You need to involve them quite early on. I think that's kind of probably my lessons. Um, I mean, getting a hefty project finance deal done, um, so people who would think they need the money in 16 months from now probably should start talking to bankers today, because it can actually really take quite a bit of time for material financing to be arranged. I also work together with several parties that are able to find financing. I mean, it's a whole separate consulting business, talking to such boutique consultants who basically make the business of finding financing. That's again an art in itself. There are so
Yeah.
many financing sources. So that's actually really positive, right? So I think key lesson here is start thinking about how you will finance early on. And it will be very easy if you think about how you will, um, who will be your off takers, what will they pay, and then thinking backwards from that.
Yeah, sounds very interesting and
And I hope
wise.
we're also doable, because I think that
Yeah.
as long, please correct me whenever I tell you something that you think, that sounds interesting but not doable. Challenge me, and please also challenge others, because I think we sometimes, yeah, we present visions, but we forget to mention the road to the vision.
No, but actually, that's a good path that you just presented. So I couldn't agree more. So why have only 20% of low carbon hydrogen projects progressed beyond the planning stage? It, what needs to change for faster development?
I think 20% is a pretty good percentage. If when I'm in consultancy, and I've been now, I mean, close to a decade in consulting, when we I learned that from very, very different consultants, to win one piece of work, so that's something that we will eventually do, we probably need on average 20 potential clients. So that's 1 in 20, that's 5%. So if that's the metric I use for consultants. So when we're, being displeased as the world, and I must honestly say it's almost, at COP29, and having been to Baku, we're talking in the hallways to very varied people. It's also this kind of like, yeah, we could do better as industry. Let's be grumpy about 20% or lower of projects actually progressing. To me, that's an amazing percentage if I compare to, for example, just mere consulting industry itself, where the rule of thumb is you have 20 people who think they might need you, but eventually just 1 in 20 that will really need you.
Yeah, yeah. I could relate from media side, and in general stats like this. So basically, we have a Pareto principle there, 2080. So hydrogen export volumes are expected to reach 16 mtpa by 2030. What key infrastructure developments are required to support this?
I think we need at least hydrogen backbone starting its development, and it has started in Europe. That alone would easily enable at least moving half of that volume, I would say, as it develops. Um, then globally, we need vessels, right? And I think ammonia is the prevalent vessels that are now being planned for and already ordered for to move around hydrogen as derivative, for example, between developments in countries like Egypt, Mauritania, or Oman, or Saudi. So we need vessels for transport. We need import terminals with ammonia cracking, and those are being built. Last time I looked, just in Northwest Europe, we had 16 terminals planned total. And what is also fantastic is that there are multiple vendors of ammonia cracking technology. And I think also very helpful development is that both fertilizer industry is active, but we also now started, companies like Yara started also looking at preparing for ammonia being used as marine fuel, and kind of getting ready for the bunkering of it, for example, in Nordics. So I think if we have the vessels for moving hydrogen derivatives around in the form of ammonia initially, and then we have their import terminals and the export facilities, obviously in countries like Oman, or countries like Mauritania or Namibia, eventually, the export side, or the Saudis, like projects like NEOM, getting ready, then with the backbone also, and also with certain strong hubs being built out, like in countries like US, where it's more decentralized development, or countries like Japan, where again it's decentralized, and Korea as well, then we're in the right direction. So vessels, pipes, import terminals. I mean, at the end, the energy industry is in a nice way boring. If you can translate numbers to certain eventually steel, that means you're moving in the right direction.
True. Europe is expected to import up to 10 mtpa of low carbon hydrogen by 2030. But projections show that only half of it is available. What are the primary obstacles causing this gap?
I think it's not different to what we saw about our discussion in about is what do we need to move to IEA direction. I think it's about the policy alignments. We need to keep coming with the mechanism that enable the the initial projects to be commercialized. So either through mandates to industries or through contract for differences, and we have those in the making, but not enough for their 10 megaton. So that means private sector would need to pay green premia if you want to get to those volumes. Projects do need 5 to 7 years lead time. So I think European Court of Auditors published a really great report this summer outlining in very detailed way how is the reality versus targets is progressing. This has been reinforced by works I just saw over last weeks of European Energy Regulatory Agency, ACER, and also Breakthrough Energy produced a report where the state of play is, and everybody agrees indeed, one is behind the targets. To move faster, or let's say again, towards the target, one needs continued policy alignment, and we need to keep signing offtake agreements.
Yeah.
And people will sign those offtake agreements if the policy keeps pointing in the direction for this and this sectors. It's a good idea to have hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives uh, on the radar. And then we have that in Europe for the fertilizer, for refining, for maritime, and for aviation.
You mentioned the right kind of infrastructure. And given the current delays, how likely is it that this infrastructure will be completed in time?
It's a bit chicken and egg. I am working with several peers to do some analysis on what can be done. I think most important thing which can slow down infrastructure development is the way off-takers are ready to interact with suppliers. So again, if we solve their off-takers and suppliers, saying, okay, we have a vision when and how much we need hydrogen or its derivative at our doors, then building infrastructure is an easy consequence. Because infrastructure, it just, let's think of converting gas pipes to hydrogen. So there is interesting dilemma where same, let's say, industrial customers actually may need longer natural gas because they don't have yet trust that they can switch to hydrogen, and those same converted pipes for natural gas can be actually converted to hydrogen, and one needs a clear timeline when the customers are ready to disconnect. So a lot hangs on having a clear pathway, how the milestones of switching of industry to this new fuel would be. So I think that's the key point of attention to keep addressing. And I think countries like Germany are on top of it with their carefully developed financing plan for their core network, care nets as they call it. and also for having very regular planning outlook together with industry how the switch will go on.
You are just creating an avalanche of questions with every answer. So, what
It's okay. We
policy?
still have 7 minutes.
Yeah. If it's 7 minutes, then we will go to the final question straight. But what policy or private sector actions are most needed to accelerate, say, pipeline construction?
I think in pipeline construction, actually, at least in some countries, we have the policy. So I think Germany is now uh, cleared. There is the financing solution has been designed together by government and regulator in the industry. So now in countries at least like Germany, there is no, you don't need policy, you just basically need industry having clarity when and how much they want so that the development of pipelines can be timely sized. Um, in some countries, you have issues with landowners. So because you also need, and I mean, on average, we need at least 40% of pipelines in Europe to be new for this hydrogen backbone across Europe. So that means we will have questions around permitting and landowners asking questions and perhaps sometimes requiring compensation. So this kind of very practical question, how to align, is I think one that is not given yet a definitive answer. I think local network developers are giving it. What is also, I think, quite an interesting one policy wise, how to align the hydrogen network development with, for example, water network development or with power grid development. So, how do we really optimize the industry? How do we societally build and design efficiently? There, I think, for example, solutions like digital twins, where you create a copy of your network based on real data and then start experimenting, but first virtually, what perhaps in terms of flows, compressor station installations, etc., you could do differently, also aligning to the power grids, because electrolyzers also may draw from power grid, or hydrogen can be used as a storage for power systems eventually for a small volume. So those type of alignment, I think, is also very interesting in what kind of policy we can create so that there is space for network companies to take orders of such new technology to be able to save eventually billions. So perhaps invest some millions in digital technology, but save billions in terms of unnecessary construction or delays.
So I have to be very thoughtful in choosing the last few questions because we're short with time. But let's go with the financial ones. How important is the role of export credit agencies in financing hydrogen projects? And how can these agencies be better integrated into the global hydrogen financing landscape?
Well, export credit agencies help effectively insure us of risk when we, and something we've been using for years in oil and gas industry, right? For example, Dutch Export Credit Agency, and it's documented, has been, for example, ensuring work of some of the oil and gas industry suppliers historically globally. So now all these agencies, including such agencies as the Dutch one, are moving to the new world of providing such support to renewable energy projects, including hydrogen. I had on several occasions the honor of having representatives of export credit agency in my panels and discussing on this. My take from this is that it's really helpful because it's basically provides additional cover for certain risks that private companies are not able to take when, for example, building a project, let's say in outside Europe, but intended and with use of technology for Europe. So that means that afterwards financiers are able to provide lower cost financing, which then decreases cost of hydrogen or its derivatives, which then helps to sign offtake agreements. So by that cycle, we're lowering the cost of eventually energy and thus increasing the chance of deals being made. So export credit agencies, I mean, big sums up. What they're not always very much on the radar actually as almost like orchestrators because they actually know the bankers, they know uh, they know the insurers, they know their some of the industrial players who they support. So there could be an interesting question there. Is there perhaps more that this export credit agency, once you have a project that you approach first them and say, with which banks should I talk for this project? If you would be involved, who would you advise? You know, where do you have good experiences? So you almost use them as one of the points of entry when you start building your backing for your consortium.
And finally, what lessons can hydrogen stakeholders learn from the renewable energy sector's cost reduction over the past 2 decades?
Well, uh, let's start with the lesson they cannot learn or need to unlearn. I think solar industry and wind industry had it easier because there was an established power market. So once you built your wind farm or you had your solar farm, you could plug onto power grid and you already knew how it would work, you know, what kind of historical pricing was there. There was, of course, a bit of discussion on the you know, what's the price of the green electricity. So through guarantees of origin having a premium, which, you know, ranged in the early days, for example, for some of the Dutch green energy, you could get €1 to €7 per megawatt hour, you know, plus up to the regular power prices. So there is no such clarity for hydrogen and its derivatives yet. We have some initiatives for power markets establishment based AX, providing a hydrogen price index called Hydrix. We have High Exchange thinking about how to provide pricing, and we have several others behind scenes looking into provide a pricing index just to create on pair development with what we used to have 20 years ago with solar and wind. Because I think one key difference is there is no plug and play market yet for hydrogen and its derivatives. There is the gray alternatives, but they're also not as well established as power markets were 20 years ago. So that's maybe the main lesson for me is not, you know, yes, we'll see some, if we build at scale, then costs go down. I think main lesson is actually to look to solar and power, think, what did they have that we don't? And I think the key message there is there was a very clear plug-in market. And I think that's where the industry can be helped. And we have one example globally where I think this is being really well done. So H2 Global Initiative, now also, for example, backed by internationally uh, by Australia as an example. There they say, okay, if Australian projects want to export hydrogen, for example, to Germany, they can, with H2 Global, there is a clear tender for 10 years. And on the other side, there are buyers being arranged by H2 Global. So one doesn't need to worry on that. So there is this kind of matchmaking service. So that's a type of action already, policy action on the basis of that lesson. What do we need to fix so we can mirror the success of solar and wind industry many years ago? Well, we need to organize a plug and play hydrogen and hydrogen derivative market. And we have an example of it, H2 Global, and we need more examples and more trials.
Eric, thank you so much for being my guest today.
All right, it was fun. I always so thank you for being such a thoughtful interviewer, and I did note your invitation for a webinar when Anna Stanic and I have the template for um, hydrogen
For sure.
contracting ready. I think we will be helping the industry with that, and also yeah, look forward to stay
Yeah.
in touch. Thank you for this interview.
Thanks, and hope to talk to you soon.
Looking to amplify your brand in the hydrogen energy sector? Welcome to H2 Energy News, your go-to platform for impactful industry insights. Every month, we connect with over 80,000 visitors and generate more than 251,000 page views. Our reach is unmatched with over 1.2 million web impressions and a loyal social media following of 9,000 plus. Our newsletter reaches 77,000 plus subscribers, decision makers, industry leaders, and innovators. Want to target specific markets? Our geo-targeting capabilities cover Europe, the United States, and the MENA region. We reach key stakeholders, 27% senior executives, 32% directors, and 20% owners and partners. H2. Energy News isn't just a news platform, it's where the hydrogen energy community converges to shape the future. Join us and let's make an impact together. Visit energynews.biz and take your brand to the next level.